Hello and welcome everyone to the very first session of the Vixio Strategy Booster webinar series. My name is Jack and I'll be running today's session. So you'll hear from me again at the end with some key action points you can take away. We know that compliance teams today are under more pressure than ever, and that's why we've created this series to help you sharpen your strategy and turn screen time into real strategic advantage. Each session is designed to be short, focused and practical, providing clear and actionable steps you can start putting into practice instantly. In today's session, we will unpack the challenges associated with new market entry in the gambling industry. And now I'm delighted to hand over to today's moderator, James Kilsby, to kickstart this conversation.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the first in what is a series of Vixio webinars, Strategy Booster webinars. And today we will be discussing crossing borders in gambling expansion and exploring the pivotal subject of how to effectively expand into newly regulating markets for online gambling. I am James Kilsby, Chief Analyst with Vixio. And for those of you who are already existing Vixio subscribers, welcome. And for those who may be not familiar with Vixio, I'll briefly introduce us. Vixio is a leading RegTech provider that takes the heavy lifting out of regulatory monitoring and offers comprehensive, actionable intelligence on compliance and regulation for both the gaming and the payments industries. In terms of the topic we'll be talking about today on new markets, Vixio provides monitoring and alerting of regulatory changes across more than 180 jurisdictions worldwide. We have a series of curated reports that clearly summarize the state of play for online gambling regulation in countries and states all across the world, and also a series of interactive tools that allow our users to query regulations and standards and find the answers that they need to often challenging questions. We also have a team of journalists that produce daily insights and analysis on the fast-changing online gambling industry, and also a suite of market data and forecasts that allows our users to both understand market size of today while project for the market size of tomorrow. So as you can see on your screen in front of you there, we will be exploring those topics all around the issue really of new market entry. And as I think about this subject, it's fair to say it is increasingly important, both for operators, but also for suppliers in the online gambling industry. And if we think about how the industry has evolved over the past 10 or so years, so back up to the middle of the past decade, really the regulated online gambling market, it's fair to say, was centered on a core of, a small core really, of just regulated Western European markets. Those markets are obviously still important to the industry today, but growth has slowed. And so it's become more important for both operators and suppliers to move to new jurisdictions in order to grow their businesses. And we've obviously seen an increasingly diverse set of jurisdictions globally that have chosen to regulate online gambling over that time. So, what was once a Eurocentric industry has expanded to not just Central and Eastern Europe, but also to North America and the US and Ontario. There are a number of regulated Latin American markets now, not least Brazil. Many African countries are moving in the direction of regulation of online gambling. South Africa has, of course, become a key reference point for the industry globally. And we're starting to see that move into Asia with the Philippines as well. So entering new markets is absolutely pivotal to success, it's fair to say. And we'll be talking about some of the challenges that need to be overcome in doing that today, while also looking at a pipeline of new market opportunities that are pending for the last few months of 2025 and bleeding into 2026. So taking some expert views on Alberta, New Zealand, then in Europe, Finland and Ireland, and we'll think about applying some of the challenges and best practices and moving to new markets and thinking about those pending opportunities as well. So to introduce an expert panel that we have today, which we're truly privileged to have join us for this conversation. Firstly, Charmaine Hogan, Head of Regulatory Affairs for Playtech. Charmaine has a dedicated focus on emerging and re-regulating markets and takes the lead on behalf of Playtech and I think fair to say the wider industry on sharing best practices with regulators and policymakers worldwide to set those jurisdictions up for success for their own policy goals, but also for the industry as well. Charmaine, prior to joining Playtech and in the industry, worked on EU legislation and policy covering the internal market, including digital services, both on behalf of Malta and also the European Commission. And at the European Commission, Charmaine led discussions with the European gambling regulators on policy developments, particularly on enhancing consumer protection. So thank you, Charmaine, for joining us. We'll also have with us today Paresh Rugani, Head of Compliance at Play and Go. Paresh has been in that role with Play and Go for nearly 3 years now. And prior to taking up the compliance role at Play and Go was a senior official, including Deputy Director at the Ordinary Gambling Control Commission. So I think it's fair to say with our expert panelists today, they can represent not only the views of the industry in their current roles today, but both also come from a past role in policy making or with a regulator, so can offer that expert perspective as well. Charmaine, Paresh, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, James.
Thank you very much, James, for inviting me, for having me.
Great. If we're all set, we'll dive straight in. So from your expert perspectives and your experiences, what are the biggest challenges that you encounter when it comes to preparing your businesses to enter a new market? Do you tend to find the same challenges being repeated in each market in general, or does it really depend jurisdiction to jurisdiction? Charmaine, you want to pick that one up?
Yes, I mean, challenges, yes. An easy reply to your question would be a yes and no. There are challenges, but I would also add in that as more and more of us are working in the regulated space, we also obviously see more emerging markets as opportunities, and you want to be in that regulated space. I jokingly said yes and no because what you see is very similar objectives, but rather different approaches. And that, I think, is a fair point because no country is exactly the same. So we have to, I think, also as an industry, and certainly us as suppliers, appreciate that, the way gambling may be viewed in one country or one region is not necessarily the same as another. And I say that because even my experience way back in European markets taught me that when the industry would come to us to have those discussions, at the time we had fewer markets regulated. So it's like, this is how the UK is regulating it. This is how I think XYZ country in other parts of Europe should regulate it. But that's not the case, because if you think of culture, dare I say, religion, stigma, it differs. So that has a bearing. Why? Because if you think where we are today in more and more regulated markets, it has an impact in how early on and how deep and wide you can have those conversations with policymakers and with regulators where they exist, right? And some of them are still on a learning curve, but if there's a bit of a stigma with the industry, they are not having the discussions with us, but they're having the discussions either only with other regulators or simply looking at regulations. And we know, I mean, Paresh, I suppose you can discuss this as well, just lifting a piece of regulation, copy-paste, does not cut it, because there's the intent to why that was written. So I think that is one challenge, if you like, if you don't find the robust people that you can or want to talk to with you early enough. Then you have the other element where sometimes a regulatory authority is being set up at the same time when legislation is being discussed, or they need to suddenly beef up their authority and they're lacking skills, whether it's legal, whether it's technical. And that's a challenge, because you need to be talking to the right people as well. Timelines, then I would say, right, is a key one. And it's not just about, in my mind, whether a market has set a deadline for when they launch, is that you hear about all these ambitious proposals, and rightly so. You regulate a market, you want to protect your consumers, you want to migrate those players to the legal market, you want robust operators coming in, fine. But you need to have time to discuss, consult. Some jurisdictions don't give themselves enough time to genuinely consult. And then we as an industry, suppliers, especially on the technical side, are suddenly faced with a set of rules which are published. And dare I say, when they're copy-pasted and the regulator doesn't necessarily perhaps understand or didn't have time to understand the intent of that, it's even difficult to have those questions. When I go to my development colleagues and say, here are the rules, they're published, I've read them, this is what I've picked up, that's not how the technical guys analyze regulations, right? They need to see what development work is needed, the operations, the cost, the time, and sometimes the timeline is really, really short. When a regulator has a fixed date to launch set by politicians, so the regulator has got to do its work, that's really hard, because everything that you've added in your rules, whether it's about testing and the certification, whether you want test labs to be locally accredited, whether suppliers need to be licensed or not, and whether games need to be adjusted to the market, that all takes time. And what happens is the closer you get to the timeline, often enough, there's a whole backlog. And when you're a supplier, you have all the operators coming to you, wanting you to assure them you're going to be ready on time. You, in turn, are having those conversations with test labs, probably, and they have a backlog. So you have all this circle of discussions going on, but that doesn't change the fact that the deadline is here. And then you have to have a regulator that's going to have to find a way to launch on that date. So those are just really high-level challenges, if you like, that I would start with.
No, we may unpack a couple of those things, but Paresh, anything you would add from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, our approach is slightly different. What we do is we see what licenses are available, whether a B2B license is available or just B2Cs, and then we try and focus on it, depending on whether a B2B license is required or not. We look at the market size, we look at what regulations are in place, we look at the technical requirements and scope out the amount of work we would have to do to fit into that model, and then decide whether we're going to go into it or not. And obviously, when we're looking at the market size, we're also looking at the reputational risk. A lot of jurisdictions are relatively small, but not being in there says a lot more than being in there. So, by absence, it seems like we're either afraid of certain regulations, or we don't value that market or take it as seriously. So we enter markets, with high reputations as well, even though the returns are low.
Presumably as well, coming from the more the B2B side, you're driven by operators as well. So if you have valued operator partnerships and they decide to go into a jurisdiction, you're likely to follow. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely correct. And one of the things about deadlines is, if like Brazil wanted to go live on January 1st, you're right, what a day to pick. December is practically wiped out. January the 1st is wiped out because most people are on holiday. But still, what I was willing to do is say to our operators, look, we'll deliver on the 10th of January. You can start with whatever you've got until then. So quite often those deadlines are not always set in stone. They are for the operator. They have to have something to offer.
Yeah.
But as long as they have some games to offer, they don't need to onboard everybody at the same time.
And on that point of deadline, I guess which is better or worse or more challenging? Somewhere like Brazil, where you have I think fair to say, a politically set deadline that is immovable. Is that better than what is a moving target and can push? We have seen jurisdictions that are supposed to release regulations or go live by X month or date, and because there is no sort of set deadline for it, that gets pushed back months and months. So is it fair to say that's a kind of a two-sided coin? When you have a deadline, it creates challenges, but it also does set a goal for the market.
I think that's why I thought I didn't use the word deadline. I said timelines. At
Yes.
least you need to know that there's a timeline in place that the authorities are working towards. Otherwise, you could be, talking for a long time and trying to have your perfect regulatory framework rolled out. You need a time, and a timeline needs to be realistic, which I suppose goes back a bit to when I said, different countries, they're not having those conversations. Why do we say that, 6 months, if you're going to go into granular detail, is not going to cut it? And, that the industry needs to be able to tell its story properly, and the authorities need to want to understand why. It's not because we are not ready to come to market. Of course we are. But I think sometimes, and it's a fair comment, I suppose, that the authorities forget that there are many other countries looking to regulate at pretty much similar timelines. And as large as you might be as a company, you still need to figure out, okay, I need to prioritize. It goes back to what you were saying in a way, Parish, about market realities, market size, the number of operators, that we need to prioritize a little bit, like, where's my project team going? What should I tell them to focus first? You do have operators, some operators, if not all, who want to go to market on day one. So they want you to give them a certainty that you're going to be ready. And that's when I meant the conversation, like with Brazil. I'm like, I don't know. I'm still analyzing the regs, which have just yet been issued. I'm still waiting for more test labs to be accredited to be sure that there's no backlog at risk. I mean, certainly you're not going to take all your games to be certified for day one. There's things you do and you don't do, but you need a timeline. Should it be a moving target? I think there should be the possibility for the authorities to do their job properly. If they have many license applications, there should be time to genuinely, in my view, vet those applications and not rush them through, because these are the ones coming to your market and you're going to be responsible for supervising those, whether it's B2Bs as well as B2Cs. But you also then should not, in my mind, have such a long period where it's a moving period, especially, and I'm saying this with Ontario in mind, to be honest, where you had operators who did their utmost and suppliers to be ready and come to the market in the legal regulated space. And then as much as the regulator needed some time because they wanted to transition in as many as possible, because that was an objective of why they moved to commercial licensing, then you want those who have not yet come to market to feel the push that, okay, this is the timeline now. So pros and cons, if I may use that term, but a hard deadline can be quite hard if you've not done your background work to have everything that I've been talking about, like, what type of market do I want, the products, the player protection element, do I want a centralized self-exclusion system, do I want very regular audits, certifications by game, by platform? You have to think about all of that when you're setting your timeline, I think.
Great. So a common challenge that Vixio hears about is fundamental sort of need, whether operators or suppliers really, and that's to take what's written on paper in the legislation, regulations, or technical standards, and then translate them into specific sort of obligations or technical reconfigurations that need to be achieved in order to pass certification and get to market. What does that process look like at your companies when it comes to, you have this evolving body of regulation, and then you need to get configured to be able to launch into the market? I guess, Parish, starting with you, who are the internal and the external holders external stakeholders that are involved in that?
So for us, the internal stakeholders is our technical compliance department that start off the process, and then our game designers pick it up from technical compliance. And the external would be the testing house, BMM. So we would go to them when we've got some questions, but luckily they come to me first because I can interpret regulations and I can see what they're trying to achieve with that regulation. So yeah, I advise in the first place if they can't fully understand what the regulator is trying to achieve with a particular technical standard or requirement. So we do it in two ways. either internally or then go to BMN and say, this is our interpretation, what's yours?
In a very similar way, exactly that. You have your technical compliance, and then you have your individual product teams who are also having those individual conversations with, in our case, whether it's bingo, sports betting, poker, casino, live casino, having all those individual conversations. And sometimes they can be quite interesting, because if I think of my live casino colleagues and my casino colleagues, I'm having pertinent conversations, and sometimes we get on a call together because it's not necessarily 100% the same. And then, as you said, Prash, you use a bit your experience, go, I know where they're coming from. And this is, I believe, the intent of what they meant by this. And then precisely that the conversations with the test labs, who are rightly there to do their job, to test according to compliance with those rules. But sometimes you also have interesting conversations with them as well, to arrive at whether we're taking the same understanding. And that's fine, right? That's what we're trying to do. And I suppose the other part I would add, it's always really useful when you can also have those conversations with a regulatory authority or someone in the regulatory authority. It's not always the case, but I think when it is, it's really useful to be able to say, I understand, right? I think I do understand what you're trying to achieve. Maybe when you read the provisions a bit, it reads that it's not possible to do something, but I think I can, and I'm meeting your rules. And so it's good that you can have those conversations even on the technical level, which again goes back to what we said earlier about the authority needing good people also on the IT side, the technical people, to be able to have those conversations.
Presumably that process is more challenging when you have a new market that has legislated and is going to be opening, but regulations and standards are still a moving target. That must yes. You have to be reactive and nimble during that process.
It is, because even when you see a regulation issued as draft, in all honesty, maybe it won't change at all when it's finally published, but you have to move in steps. You're not going to start any development work, materially, if something is still draft. You can still do an analysis, so when you have a draft in hand, it's of course already leading you to the direction that the authorities are moving towards. But when you have only one piece of a regulation, you're waiting for another piece, it's difficult, yes, to move seamlessly, because you're reading one, but you're still dependent on another. Some things like, I don't know whether they're going to require localized equipment of sorts, usually that early enough, and that you can factor in. But if they're going to require any certain features to be on or off, or in the case of Brazil, wanting certain information to appear to the player before they actually can play, those kind of things, they do require adjustment. So you want to be certain that that's the case. But that's going on, as I was saying earlier, while you're moving closer and closer to the timeline that they set themselves, which was 1st of January, and you're still trying to get those things clarified to be able to be ready to have your content ready for testing and certification as well. So there's a lot of things happening. But again, I would say there are challenges, but there are also exciting times when a new market is opening and there's everybody, working together. And yeah, the December one, when you tell your younger colleagues, you're going to have to work on, jokingly, on New Year's Eve. Doesn't go down well, but in a joking way, right?
But Paresh, has that been your experience as well? How do you respond to curveballs, or that Sharpen put it? You have part of the picture, but you're still waiting for another bit.
Yeah, that is extremely challenging, because everybody wants to get going on a project. Everybody wants to start working and getting through things, completing tasks and moving along. And then all of a sudden we say, but we don't know this part yet. We can't move on. And that really kills the momentum and kills the enthusiasm quite often. And it really does cause us issues to get people motivated again. And especially if some things have changed slightly, then move towards this direction. And then all of a sudden we say, okay, now we've got the latest updates. is here. And they say, we went all this way. And, so it can be demotivating as well. But ultimately, we just have to get on with it and get it done.
We've referenced a couple of jurisdictions through the conversation, but I wondered if you could, I'm sure in your roles, you love all of your regulators equally. But are there any examples of jurisdictions you can think of that you think have been particularly good at managing a kind of market opening process that you think that upcoming jurisdictions might be well advised to learn from?
I think sort of if I look at only at the last couple of years, I would say Ontario. For the reasons that we've been mentioning here, there was not a fixed deadline, but there was a timeline. The timeline was announced to those interested in the market, broken up in phases even. There were consultations, and the consultations were run properly and, in my mind, quite thoroughly, not just in the terms of a document issued respond to that, but in terms of having a group calls, if you like, and announcing the direction that they're going. In parallel, in my experience at least, there was also quite an open door in having the one-to-ones to have those conversations, not only to ask questions, but just sometimes in general to talk about products. I'm going to go back to Live Casino because it's a core product of ours, and just to sort of bring them up to speed, if I may, like, listen, this is where Live Casino is these days. This is the type of innovative games in that area. By the way, this is how some other jurisdictions do it. I know you're looking towards the UK. Here are the parameters, and you're exchanging. And the other thing I found with the people within the AGC, also Ontario's regulatory authority, was also willing to ask questions where they might not have been up to speed. And that's okay, because that's our intention. It's an exchange. We want to share, and it's in our interest to share. So I found that really, really, really useful. And then, the regulator was also, I think, quite honest and transparent from the start in saying our objective is to transition in the operators and the players into the legal market. We want you to come in. We want to give you time to come in. But by the way, we have really robust responsible gambling standards and expectations out of it. So they set the bar, and I think, why not? That is, I think, being reflected a little bit more now if I think about Alberta. And you mentioned, I think, New Zealand early on, to an extent as well, trying to mirror a little bit that. And as long as you start those conversations early on and you're absorbing that information, I think that's great. My concern sometimes with the jurisdictions are that, again, if you suddenly have a smaller, tighter timeline beyond perhaps these type of conversations, you're not going to have enough time to lay your document in a draft and allow responses to that. So, you still don't know if there's any, the devil in the detail, as we like to say. But certainly Ontario, for me, is a positive.
Paresh, any jurisdictions that you've worked with or observed that you thought?
No, as you said, we love them all equally. But we at Play and Go, we found the experience of joining Denmark very, very smooth. It was a structure that we were used to, where the games would be certified through a portal. The certificates would be uploaded through a portal and always approved by the regulator. So it was a single point of approval. There was no retesting of games, which happens in the US quite a lot, where the US want to test everything themselves, although we provide certificates. And at the same time, their stance on suppliers' games being available on unlicensed markets was a lot more lenient and understanding. There is a lot of issues where people think that if they cut the games off at source, or regulators think if they cut the games off at source, then they won't have an illegal market. It's not always true. And the source is not always a legitimate B2B supplier. Quite often they use advertising campaigns to say, we've got Playtech games on here, we've got Play and Go games on here, but realistically they don't. It's just to get people in the door. And some regulators have just said, we've just seen this, you're not compliant, what are you going to do about it? And Denmark came to us and said, we've seen this, what are your comments? We explained to them and showed them through the website, walked them through the website and said, look, although they're advertising certain things, they're not there.
So we have Denmark and Ontario. I won't ask you to point to any jurisdictions that you feel have been more challenging. But I would like for us to speak to a couple of the pending market opportunities. We're talking about new market expansion, and there's a good pipeline of them as we look into last few months of this year and into 2026. So I hope you could, I guess we could just have a conversation of a couple of minutes about a few of those markets and what you personally are watching for, what you think the industry is watching for, and expectations for those different jurisdictions as we look ahead. Charmaine, you've already flagged Alberta, so maybe we'll start there. But I guess, what are you watching for, and what's your expectations when it comes to Alberta, and what are you thinking about when it comes to entering that market in the coming months?
Well, hopefully we continue moving forward this year, because last year it got stalled a bit, and it goes back a bit to what I was talking, projects and timelines, and there was this expectation the market was going to launch soon, we're a supplier, we have all these operators, are you ready? And you go like, ready with what? So that has calmed down, and there's more serious conversations going on now. I think I'm happy to see that they're beefing up the authority that will be the regulatory authority, and that's really important. And we've had conversations with them. They've already been rather open to speak with the industry, which is again a plus. So we don't know much beyond the fact that they're going to launch. There's obviously this expectation, push, whatever word we want to use, that they are looking to Ontario being the closest regulated market province, which is not a bad thing, because in Ontario you have all the regulated products available, have all these things which are a plus. So if I start from that, I'm presuming, not a good word, that all the products are going to be available. So that's a plus. Again, the objective of why you're licensing. I would hope that if they're looking at KYC, player onboarding, player registration, and what have you, that they'll be sensible on that front. Testing and certification, if they're changing nothing in their regulations, and the games are going to be very similar, I should say exact requirements that what Ontario has, you need to have everything retested, recertified for your market. There's a cost, by the way, not just a timeline, every time you do certification. So, you can mirror as much as you like Ontario, and that is a good thing, because there's a lot that is good in Ontario, and that will impact on the timelines as well, because if you're not reinventing or adding nuances, that's always the concern, then it's not that difficult to recreate, so to speak, a website to mirror what's available in Ontario, but you can also improve on, right? So I'm also hoping that the authorities in Alberta are talking with their counterparts in Ontario, and why not? Let's improve anything on player protection. Can I improve it? KYC, AML, let's improve. And the one thing I suppose I will mention, because it has been mentioned by the minister as an objective of his, that he would like to launch with a centralized self-exclusion register. Now that, of course, sounds good and is a good thing. You want to have a centralized self-exclusion register for players. But I think it's one thing to say, I'm selecting the provider and the technical solution is there. But at the same time, if you want to launch it on day one, and that's the crux of it, and you need to already now, in my mind, know, okay, what are the player protection policies I want to have in place? What are the timelines I want to have for self-exclusion? Do I want it online and land-based? There's a lot of things you need to figure out, because the provider can be the best in the world, and there are many really good ones out there, but they can provide you depending on the requirements that you're giving them. And then, by the way, us as platform providers or operators need to integrate with that. Is it going to be run by the regulator? So those kind of things then might cause issues. As I said, though, obviously a self-exclusion centralized register is an important thing to have. But saying I want it from day one, we need to know when day one is. And there's other things that need to fall into place, but it's certainly an aspiration that you should have in a regulated market.
Thank you. No, it's certainly, I think the Ontario market has performed very, very strongly. Major market on a global scale now. So there's a lot of anticipation, I think, for Alberta, probably the main North American new jurisdiction to watch in the coming months. Parish, I was going to ask about Ireland. Is that's another pending new market opportunity? A little bit different. I guess this is the thing about new markets, right? None of them sort of start from the same place. Ireland is a regulated market for sports betting. We're talking about transitioning now to a fully regulated online gambling and land-based gaming market all in one go. It's a little bit different from Alberta and different from other jurisdictions. But what are you watching for, Parish, in Ireland as we look ahead?
Yeah, so Ireland is still quite a way away. They are going to start with operators being licensed early next year or late this year. I can't see it happening late this year now, although they haven't still opened up licensing. And then the B2Bs will be much later on, so we're hoping for middle of next year, hopefully, but that may get pushed away as well, pushed a little bit further. But we know their requirements, although they haven't published them, they're implied that they will follow the UK requirements. And therefore, if we can meet the UK requirements, we're confident that we'll be meeting the Ireland requirements. So we're still waiting, because we won't take anything for granted until we see it in writing. But we're confident that we'll be ready for the market as soon as it opens up.
And that's where in Ireland you obviously have a brand new gambling regulatory authority that's been established from the ground up. Alberta, different, right? You're expanding the remit of a existing gambling regulator. So again, I think that's where you started us off, Charmaine, understanding the regulatory and the cultural and the policy foundations of the jurisdiction is quite important in that regard. Anything to add on Ireland, Charmaine, that you think?
No, I agree 100% with Parish. What you've just said, we think we know pretty well the direction that Ireland is heading, which is largely, I think, the UK. The legislation has a lot in it that gives a lot of remit to the regulator. They've been recently beefing up the authority again, which is a good thing. Yes, they've announced that they will start with licensing. But I hope we'll come to a stage where, I suppose back to when I was talking about the intent of something, that if you're following the UK, you're doing it not just because they're the closest neighbor, but that's the way you want your regulatory framework to be. That's the direction you want to go. Because there's a lot in there. I talked about game design, game features that came into force in the UK in the last years, but that was also done on the basis of discussing with the industry in the UK, player data in the UK. So, I'd hope that there are those conversations ongoing. Again, so what you have in place will ultimately suit your market, of course.
I'd stick with Europe, and obviously another market the industry is very focused on is Finland. Been a sort of a long-standing monopoly for online gambling, but that is going to the market's going to liberalise like Denmark did over a decade ago, and a bit more recently Sweden. What are you watching for in Finland? Paris, you want to?
Yeah, so we've been watching Finland for a while now. It's one of those countries which seem to have been any day now, or we'll wait.
Yeah.
So let's hurry up and wait. But it's very interesting, and the framework of the regulations that we've seen being put together so far seem to be very comprehensive and are pretty much what we would expect from any Scandinavian regulator. But still yet to see anything in concrete regarding the actual regulations or the requirements.
Charmaine, your view on Finland? Because there is a timeline. There is a timeline there, right?
There is a timeline. I think they've allowed themselves to move a bit around it, but on their bill, I think they're moving more or less in the timelines I have in mind. I think I agree with you, Paresh. Like, when you look at the bill, it's certainly going in the right direction. And again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, they're not starting from scratch in the sense that Veikkaus, their monopoly, has had a plethora of products available on its online site, robust their protection provisions, KYC, AML. They've had all of that, so they're not starting from scratch. The one thing, obviously, if I was the Finnish authorities, I would do, what is the objective of why I'm opening up to commercial licensing? And that is a recognition that there is a gray market. So you need to make sure that you're opening up to commercial licensing. You're going to allow, good choice for the players, good value for the players to what they're used to now. You're no longer, in legal terms, needing to justify to remain a monopoly. And so you have to have certain provisions in place to manage what you're providing on your market and to have high consumer protection provisions in place. So when you are looking to open up, you have to make sure that you're going to continue allowing the players to enjoy what they already enjoy now, but in the regulated space. And I think that's really important.
One more pending new market, and I think this one's particularly interesting because we talk about Finland and following other Scandinavian markets, and Ireland following borrowing from the UK and Alberta, likewise in Ontario. I think it's fair to say New Zealand is a little bit, doesn't have such an obvious pathway or somewhere to follow. Online casino games not regulated in Australia, and there's limited models in that part of the world to look to. We're still in the legislative process, I guess, in New Zealand. Legislation does need to be passed, so that's backed by the government. And it would seem to me that the government has set, talking of timelines, an ambitious one by wanting to launch with up to 15 licensees sort of mid-2026. I'll throw it to either of you, whoever wants to go first. Charmaine, maybe take us there. But
I think.
What should we be thinking about when we talk about New Zealand?
Yeah, it's a fair point that you said. Which jurisdiction are they looking towards in terms of regulation? And I suspect they will have also been looking or talking with the UK authorities, to be honest. Yeah. And hopefully also with the Ontario authorities, who are, by the way, really open to have that regulatory collaboration, which is good. Ambitious timelines, yes, I think for the similar reasons that we've said, you're starting from scratch, basically. And we do know that they have set a very robust harm minimization approach. I mean, that is their objective in regulating the market. So that's important, even us as an industry. We're talking about having an idea of which direction they're going. That's the parameters they've set out, not the economic revenue, but the harm minimization approach. And they are on a fact-finding journey at the moment. They are holding those conversations. They are holding dialogue with industry. So they're already right now probably getting a pretty good picture of what it is they want to roll out. As we know, it's one thing having a good idea. It's another thing sitting down and really writing those regulations. But I think there's a good indication of which direction they're going. As we know, it is online casino games, so we're not talking about anything else but that. So their focus is pretty structured and limited on that. I think if you look at their legislation, it's not prescriptive in that sense, as far as we know, right? We have to see what they come out with. They don't seem to be going in a direction like, oh, I want you to come and have all your equipment localized over here. So those kind of things, which are, again, a cost consideration probably, if so, for operators and suppliers. So moving in the right direction, ambitious yet, yes. What I'm looking for there is that there will be enough time to see those drafts and to consult with the industry, rather than a rush and you're seeing something fait accompli and you have to just go with it.
Apparently, New Zealand's and presumably another market you're watching as well.
Absolutely. I think that they are looking at Australia. Although Australia doesn't have an online market, they have a strong land-based market.
Absolutely, yeah.
And they have a lot of experience in gambling. I meet a lot of Australians in the industry, in the regulatory space as well. So, they do know what they're talking about as far as regulations are concerned. Maybe they're focused a little bit more on land-based. So I suspect that they are having those conversations as well to try and avoid the errors that have been seen in the pokies market in pubs and so on and so forth. So I'm hoping that they are also listening to their closest neighbours. But their intention is mainly to obviously remove the unlicensed market and the black market element from New Zealand to make it a regulated market and a controlled market. So starting with a limited number of licenses is, I think, a very good move for a small island like that, that they can control what they're testing and then maybe expand out. So
Can I just one thing? You made me think about something. Sorry, Parsh. You're right in saying they will look to Australia because there is something which is casino there, which is land-based. And you reminded me of other jurisdictions and other regulations where, whilst that's a good thing, that when you're drafting regulations for the online, they're not drafted with land-based in mind. You do see provisions out there where they're talking about the regulator having the possibility of having websites that don't run 24/7, for example. And that maybe is inspired by land-based, but as we know in the online space, the licensed operators might not be available 24/7, but other unlicensed sites would be. So yeah, I mean, yes, you need to look something because, then conversely, Brazil, for example, didn't even have land-based to try to understand what it is they were regulating in the online casino space, for example. So it's not a bad thing, is what I mean to say, but don't draft regulations is, I suppose, my message for online, looking only at land-based.
I think in New Zealand from the B2C side, I think it's going to be interesting to see how they structure the licensing process. Right, not many markets have limited the number of B2C operator licenses available. In the States, it's different because I guess you've got the casinos can choose their skin partners. It's not a selection process generally. We've seen a little bit that's run by the regulator. So I think it'd be interesting to see how New Zealand structures that and how however many operators express interest gets selected down to 15. I think still waiting for some clarity on that and different stakeholders depending on where they're based will have different views around that. So it'd be interesting to see how that shakes out. Yeah. We're running short on time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I would just like to ask one more question, if I may, and that's on the US, which is a unique beast. I think it's fair to say from a market entry point of view. Obviously, somewhere that both Playtech and Play & Co have spent a considerable amount of time and energy building up a presence, as we've seen roll out of iGaming and obviously sports betting even more so. And I think it's what have been your experiences and observation on the US market, and in what ways has that been fundamentally different from many of the other markets we've been talking about in Europe, even Canada, LATAM? What makes the US sort of uniquely challenging from a market entry point of view? And is it a market that is what should suppliers probably be thinking about when they decide, is it worth going into the US or not? Paris, you want to take the one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I would definitely say yes, it's definitely worth going into if a supplier is considering it. It's an expensive business. Licenses, the actual license fee may not be that great, but the costs that are incurred by providing the due diligence, the fingerprints, all the application process, the investigations, the person-to-person interviews that take place, it's very different to what we're used to in Europe, where we just send a whole bunch of documents, they review them, come with questions, we provide the answers, they decide whether they give us a license or not. The US application process is a lot more in-depth, a lot more wider. I wouldn't say that it's probably more effective or not, it's just a different way of doing it. So that's one of the things, it makes it quite expensive and lengthy. But at the end of the day, you're in a market where you are relatively safe to be. Actually, what I'm trying to say is that if you're in that market, you know that people won't be stealing your IP or trying to get into that space with mock-ups of your games or something like that. So it's a relatively safe space. The regulators are very approachable. You can talk to them at any time. You can either send them an email or schedule a call, and they'll quite happily jump on a call and talk through any issues that you may be thinking about or any questions you have, which is not always the case in Europe. Quite often you get pointed to, this is the regulation, look at page 6. And that is not very helpful because you've already looked at page 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 just to understand page 6. But anyway, it happens that way. One of the challenges is that we faced is some of our games were not really to the taste of the Americans, which we thought would be absolutely a hit with them, was not a hit. And those games that we didn't think would be a hit actually were pretty good. So the tastes are very different to the Europeans. And the only other thing is that the sweepstakes competition, was and is really still quite high. I'd like to see the US get a hold of that and either legalize it or ban it.
I think that's very much an ongoing live legislative regulatory conversation that we come back to for a whole other hour on a webinar or more, I think. Charmaine, and you obviously spent a lot of time in the US as well as jurisdictions. Would you echo?
No, I think I would agree with Paresh, like it's different, and that's just a fact. And there's a lot exactly that you invest into getting your so to speak B2B licensing. I invest a lot of time in conversations on the iGaming side. As we know, the last years have been difficult in moving any bill forward. There's been steps, but in the industry, you want those steps to be faster. But you're having those conversations, and I think we've reached a time where there's a more interest, so more questions are being asked. and you just have to be ready to be able to explain and take the time to inform more about what it is we're talking about when we mean iGaming, and especially because these things come up in a state which has already regulated sports betting, to explain that you already have provisions in place to protect your players, to prevent anti-money laundering controls, and those kind of things are in place, by the way. Improve them, no problem. And those are conversations we have, and it's fine. I think the interesting part is, as you said again, Paresh, the regulators are very reachable, as are legislators, to be honest. Sometimes you are, again, coming from a European mindset, you're like, wow, that was really quick, you already answered me, which is great. And they're nice, comfortable discussions. It's more, I think, in trying to move the needle that, we have a number of jurisdictions in the US which moved fast, so to say, and in having conversations with where you want to see emerging US jurisdictions for iGaming, at least, they don't necessarily have to mirror 100% any of the other states. If you're a smaller state, for example, do you need to say, I want my live casino in your state? It's a small state, but a live casino is a big investment. So it's more those kind of conversations, or the type of supplier-employee license and those kind of things that you want to converse more, to say, like, a state with 5 million is not a state with 11 million, for example, and explain the overheads. Because sometimes, just because of the industry that we are, it's easy to forget that we do actually have overheads. Yeah. So, listen, it's exciting because you know that there are just so many more opportunities yet to come.
Right. It seems kind of a personal observation, really, of the past few years is the narrative around the US market is about market share concentration on the B2C side. Obviously, there's two major operators for sports betting, a little bit broader market share in iGaming, but and iGaming has not expanded, but the revenue numbers are overwhelmingly impressive. So I think we're still seeing a lot of B2B suppliers that maybe a few years ago would have thought of the US market as being too expensive, too invasive. There are other opportunities to prioritize. I think probably seeing a reconsideration of the US market just because of how big New Jersey and Michigan and Pennsylvania are. That those markets alone are enormous on a global scale, with the opportunity of multi-state iGaming expansion to come at some point in the future. So it's definitely from a supply point of view, I think it definitely seems a strong interest in the US market. We are coming right up for time, which is unfortunate, because I think we could have explored this subject for much longer and much greater depth. But I know you're both very, very busy preparing for Alberta and Ireland and Finland and other markets in between. So really, really appreciate your time joining us today. It's been a very, very engaging and informative discussion. So on behalf of everyone at Vixio, Charmaine, Paresh, thank you so much for your time. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
As we wrap up today's Vixio Strategy Booster session, we leave you with 4 comprehensive takeaways to put into action right away. Number 1, engage with regulators early. Analyze draft regulations and start discussing with regulators early to understand both the explicit requirements and underlying policy intent. Number 2, understand the timeline. Be clear on the timelines for market opening and react quickly as regulators evolve. Number 3, prioritize internal coordination. Align technical, compliance and product teams with clear processes for interpreting and implementing regulatory change. And 4, find a strategic balance. Weigh compliance deadlines against business potential and reputation considerations. Thank you again for joining today's session. We hope these insights help you boost your strategy and bring fresh momentum to your compliance efforts. To learn more information on Vixio, please either email info@vixio.com, give us a call, or visit our website vixio.com for more information. Please stay tuned for the next session in our series, or get in touch if you'd like to find out more now. And all that's left for me to do is thank you again for attending today's webinar.